A number of state lawmakers sounding off today after a vote in the state Senate failed to pass that $1.8 billion spending package. It would have given more money to public schools and provided rebate checks to most taxpayers. The governor and Republican leaders in the legislature worked out those details this week. Chief political reporter Jason Zimmerman speaking to people on both sides of this vote. He joins us live in the studio. Jason.
Cammie, well, the bill passed in the Assembly with a bipartisan vote. All 15 Democrats in the state Senate, along with 3 Republicans, voted against it. The governor blasting members of his own party, along with Republican gubernatorial candidate Tom Tiffany for their opposition. Tiffany lobbied members of the Senate, raising his own concerns over the bill. The agreement included $850 million in direct payments to people living in Wisconsin and $600 million for K-12 education. Another $300 million would go to general school aid meant to help lower property taxes, alongside $50 million for Wisconsin technical colleges. It would also remove state income tax on tips and overtime. Democrats criticized the deal, saying they were kept out of the bargaining and only received the bill on Monday, and it would have left the state $2.9 billion in the hole for the next budget process. However, Republicans say opposition mostly had to do with the November election.
We were all on board, but ultimately at the end of the day, party politics won, and the Senate Democrats decided, you know what, we don't want to give out the money to the people who it belongs to. We want to hold on to it and hope that we become the majority party in the next session so we can spend it on programs that don't make sense.
I liked a few things in the bill. It's not that it was 100% terrible, but it's not like I had the option to choose a little bit of this and a little bit of that. The whole package was too expensive. I mean, a smaller, more conservative bill might have been able to gain my support, but not this one.
I also asked State Senator Jamie Wall about a social media post made by Republican State Representative Shay Sortwell, claiming that the Assembly and Governor Evers offered Senator Wall a final closure date of GBCI as an amendment to gain his support, and Wall still said no. Wall disputes that claim, saying he was never approached with such a deal. Cammie, back to you.